but it still never felt like they had the group that I think Nick Nurse wants. And I do think there's a middle ground, right? Nick Nurse did not want a team with no guards and no shooters in Toronto, right? Like the offensive side of the ball matters. You don't want to go to the other side either, where it's to get the skills that you need on offense, the spacing, the shooting, that you have to sacrifice everything you want on defense. And so I do think they need to try to find more of a middle ground with the role players that they have. I know that that's easier said than done, because you can fall into the trap of this guy's okay at everything, and then you get to the playoffs and a guy who's like a 35-36% three-point shooter can't hit the broadside of a barn for 3 weeks to a month or whatever it is. But I do think watching all these games, the athleticism of most of these teams is what really jumps off the screen.
And Derek, real fast to follow that, Lost Speed TV, just to incorporate, of course, the folks, says length and speed. When watching these other teams and looking at your 76ers.
I wouldn't say so much these playoffs have shown me where the Sixers have deficiencies. It's more like the last decade of NBA basketball showed where the Sixers had deficiencies. Like I have wanted we talk about rebounding a lot. Rebounding was a disaster against the Knicks.
Yep.
Part of the way part of the way you fix your rebounding problem is to not always be in rotation. A team in rotation is always going to struggle on the glass, in part because Joel Embiid has to step up and contest, in part because other players are more worried about putting out fires and getting back on the glass. A big way you can fix your rebounding problem is to not get beat off of the dribble. One way you can do that is to get bigger athletes who can switch so you don't have to try to fight through a pick and roll every time. The Sixers, because they had so little ball handling, were running two guard sets that were short. They were too short. They were too small. You couldn't switch anything. You were getting beat off the dribble. You were getting beat off the pick and rolls. And because of that, you were constantly out of position on the glass. So I think a lot of it comes down to not only do they need athleticism, but they need size too. Like we can't be running out 6'2", 6'2" backcourts and expecting them to compete on the glass. It's not going to do it. It's not going to do it in part because those 6'2" guys aren't going to be good rebounders. It's not going to do it in part because you're going to get beat off the dribble and into rotations constantly. To me, it's about size as much as athleticism. I would love some athleticism as well, but I want size. The second thing that I learned from these playoffs, which again, I think it's more of a consistent trend, but it more comes down from the Sixers. You need somebody else to be a playmaker. You desperately need someone else to be a playmaker. Obviously, that very much applies to the minutes without Joel Embiid when Tyrese Maxey is asked to do everything. How comfortable teams were to blitz Tyrese and be like, I'm not scared of a single one of you MFers to beat me off the dribble on a 4-on-3. That can't happen. So I think that's a big thing. And that's a big part of why a lot of people look for a third star. But also it would just help with Embiid too. Like it is just the more you have players who you are like the NBA has gotten so smart about helping off of non-shooters or reluctant shooters. And that reluctant is as important as a non-shooter, that they will use every one of those players on the floor to take advantage. And in the playoffs, you just can't have it. So it would be outside of athleticism, it would be one more playmaker and size and shooting. Like there just can't be a non-shooter on the floor. It can't happen.
And one quick thing before I'm sure Devon has a lot of thoughts of his own here. On the size point, I thought the game and the moment that I've really felt that for the Sixers, and we talked about it after it happened, was in game 4 in the fourth quarter. Kyle Lowry was getting to the right spots. Kyle Lowry is trying to box guys out. But Kyle Lowry is 6 feet tall competing with OG Anunoby. Mm-hmm. And he just realistically does not have a chance. Like Joel Embiid can do what he needs to do. Tobias Harris can be in the right spot and all these things can happen. If Kyle Lowry is cross-matched on OG Anunoby on an offensive rebounding opportunity, there is no reasonable expectation you can have that he's going to get that rebound. And so like that's part of why when we talked about free agents the other day, that I was lower on Lowry and said, unless he is knowing he's coming back on a 10 to 15 minute a game role, I don't want him back here, is because you're going to end up in situations like that. Like Tyrese Maxey is going to play every single crunch time minute for this team. He's going to start. He's going to play major minutes. There's only so many minutes of a game you can get a guy like that, like Lowry, on the floor for. And so if you try to bring someone like that back and put him on the roster, you're inevitably going to run into these same problems over and over and over again. And look, if it comes down to it, Lowry's back. He certainly has value that he brings to the team as a leader, still on the floor, the defensive rotations, the smarts, the transition hit-ahead passes, all that. But I think you can see it glaringly in moments like that.
And guys, again, gals, Sixer fans, everybody in there, make sure you share yours in the chat as well, and we'll throw some of those in there. But it made me think, as Derek said, the last decade of Sixers basketball, and certainly the playoffs with these last 8 appearances that they've had. For even when someone like myself, I can only speak for myself, when Jalen McDaniels is traded to the 76ers last offseason, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. They actually have somebody with some athleticism and some length that can help out, that I've seen do things with the Charlotte Hornets. Maybe a new change of scenery out of a losing situation to a winning situation will help him out, and certainly help out the 76ers for some of those things when you get to Boston in whatever round you find them. It was in the second round last season, didn't help as much. But immediately you saw it there, and then you also saw it disappear for him. So with the lack of those types of players on this basketball team for so long, it just makes you pine for one, however type of guy it is. I saw Daniel House's name mixed in there in the chat. He's not the answer either, but he does have that skill set that Derek and Kyle are talking about.
You're taking a flyer on those types of guys.
And you get a little bit more excited of a player who is not necessarily the one that you want, but it's just because it's highlighting the fact that you don't have them. So when we talk about Paul George and Jimmy Butler and their ages of 34 and 35, then we always go back to, yes, this is the negative here, this is the negative here, but guess what they also don't have? They don't have him at all on the roster, which makes you say, I will pay that because you don't have that, and how else are you going to get it through here? But when I look at Jaden McDaniels for the Minnesota Timberwolves and how good he is with his length and his athleticism, watching him fight over screens the way that he does to get to stick with his man and cut off that pathway that you're not getting to the spot that you want because he is taking that away. He is all and crowding in your space. And even if he picks up a foul, you're still thinking about it the next time. Or even when, as we were having the discussion about Nickeil Alexander-Walker the other day, yes, he has found his role with the Minnesota Timberwolves, but buying into what they do because they have an identity of how they do it, where he fits into that. And even in the rebounding that you're talking about with Indiana, watching Isaiah Jackson come off the bench and snatch rebounds, or watching some of the other guys, not even Miles Turner, just some of the other players that come in to snatch rebounds. Aaron Nemhard finding that not 6'2", maybe 6'3", listed as 6'4", with Tyrese Halliburton, but plays bigger. Where
it helps
you
when
see
Halliburton is
yes, but you see the type of player again that you look at and say, where's that guy on this roster? So when we get excited about Ricky Council Jr., I mean the fourth, there's things there, but we also get excited about Ricky Council the fourth because again, they don't have that.
Yeah,
they haven't had that. So it takes us to a point where we have to get overly excited about a player like that and see if he can contribute, see if Jaden Springer can contribute in this uniform. And that's what some of this playoffs here is showing me, that they are far behind. They can win the way that they win if Melton is out there and healthy and able to go. If Embiid, of course, is 85, 90% of himself, still dealing with a playoff injury like he typically does. But they are glaringly missing that type of stuff on this roster.
We all silly like the mayor.